everyone, and welcome to PAC 75.
Welcome to PAC 75.
Hi, and welcome to PAC 75.
I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Arts and Humanities here at Manchester Metropolitan University. And it gives me great pleasure to open the PAC 75 Viewing the Past and Looking to the Future celebrations to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the 5th Pan-African Congress held here in Manchester in 1945. Our online programme enables us to connect with audiences around the world, and I'm delighted to announce that one of our keynote speakers, Kwame Anthony Appiah, will broadcast his speech live from his home in Princeton, USA. We are proud to be working in association with all three Greater Manchester universities and other institutions, including See My World, Contact Theatre, National Black Arts Alliance, Manchester Centre for Public History and Heritage, and the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Race Centre. Most importantly, we are pleased that this event has had the full involvement of students from across Manchester's universities, participating in interviews, running a Sunday programme, and being important collaborators in the PAC 75 celebrations. It is particularly special that we are hosting this event in Black History Month with the involvement of our students. They have engaged with passion and enthusiasm and will take the learning from these events to future generations. So, thank you for listening, stay safe, and I hope you enjoy the programme of events that we've curated for you. Thank you, and bye for now.
I'd like to say to viewers, you're going to have a really interesting time watching this. We know it's a very different period than what we had originally planned, but we're really looking forward to what will be an amazing online festival of events.
Enjoy all the programs that we have here. Just have to understand that the Pan-African Congress actioned something. It got black people leading their own people, handling their own affairs. So just join the discussion, learn, be part of all the event that is going on. But still, the most important thing is that you have to learn. Yeah.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the next session for the Pan-African Congress 75th Anniversary celebrations. So thank you very much for being with us, and I would like to introduce you now to Professor Heather Shaw. Thank you.
Welcome to this event sponsored by the Manchester Centre for Public History and Heritage. And as director of the centre, I'm really pleased to welcome Dr Ray Costello, whose talk we're about to hear, and which is titled Black Lives in Manchester and the North West at the Time of the 1945 Pan-African Congress. And we're really happy to be part of the Pan-African Congress anniversary events, but also to welcome you to this lecture as part of this year's Black History Month events. So MCPHH is involved in public history and heritage in Manchester and its region, but also nationally and internationally. So do keep an eye on our Twitter account, which is at MCPHH_MMU for news of further events. Now I'll turn to Professor Ola Uduku, who will chair the talk and introduce the speaker, Ray Costello. Thank you.
Hello everybody, and good evening, and welcome to the second event on this weekend of Pan-African Congress 75 celebrations, which celebrates the holding of the Pan-African Congress in Manchester back in 1945. This evening, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Ray Costello, who has been a long advocate for racial equality and other things, and he's going to be giving us his lecture in a few minutes. But to set the scene, I think it's important to have his biography, which I'll now read to you. So Dr. Ray Costello is a former advisor for racial equality for Liverpool Education Authority Schools Inspection Department. He is now an Honorary Research Fellow of the University of Liverpool School of Sociology and historical consultant for Merseyside Maritime Museum, National Museums Liverpool, and a board member of the Centre for the Study of International Slavery. He has been involved with many radio and television programs and has a number of publications. His latest book, Black Tommies, British Soldiers of African Descent in the First World War, was published by Liverpool University Press in 2015. And he's currently working on a new book, which is titled Native Born, A Brief History of Black People Born in the British Isles. And that will also be a Liverpool University Press publication. Now, before Ray gives his lecture and I get him to say hello to you, a bit of housekeeping. We also on your screen have a Q&A box. So as you're watching Ray give his presentation, do make use of the questions and answers box immediately. We have Marie who will be looking through the questions and answers, and immediately after the presentation, we'll be able to host those for you. Now, we don't know how many we'll be able to answer, but I've asked a special request from Ray, and he says that he's happy to have you put in your questions and we will send those to him. So if your question isn't answered this evening, expect an email from Ray at some point in the near future. So without much ado, I would like to welcome Ray, and hello Ray, hello.
Hello everybody. Now, we're celebrating the anniversary of the 1945 5th Pan-African Congress held in Manchester in the northwest of England. Now, there have been other events, iconic events for people of African descent. One thinks of the 1968 March to Washington by Martin Luther King, the release of Mandela, the election of President Obama, but none of these had the lasting worldwide effect as the result of those 6 days in Manchester in 1945. Now, I think I'd like to say something first about the roots of the Pan-African Congress, 1945. Which date back as far as the late 19th century. Now, it was a time when Black people in Britain had reached that, in terms of numbers, had reached that point of critical mass where they felt empowered to unite with the help of individuals, activists and individuals whose names should be remembered and are frequently not, in the cause of social justice for Black people worldwide. Now, I'd just like to show you some of these people. I must apologize for the quality of some of these pictures and these images. The reason is because it was at a time when they were largely unknown. Henry Sylvester Williams was probably one of the most important. He was a Trinidadian lawyer, writer, and the first Black progressive councillor for Marylebone Borough Council in London in 1906. Sat in Britain, he had formed the African Association, later called the Pan-African Association, as early as 1897, with the aim of promoting, to use the words used at the time, all subjects claiming African descent, wholly or in part, in British colonies, especially Africa, by circulating accurate information on all subjects affecting their rights and privileges as subjects of the British Empire, and by direct appeals to the imperial and local governments. In 1900, Williams organised the first African conference held in Westminster Town Hall in London. Notice he called it a conference at this time. It wasn't a congress yet. Of those present, Marika Sherwood identified 3 Africans attending, 19 visiting African Americans, 15 West Indians, 9 Africans living in the UK as residents, mostly students, and 5 Black Britons. One of these British-born activists was John Archie, and the composer and conductor Samuel Coleridge Taylor. Like Williams, John Archie was another progressive candidate at the time, and these were happy to play their part in the burgeoning movement for the assertion of rights of Black people. John Archie was born in Liverpool and was nominated for the position of Mayor of Battersea in 1913. He was born in 1863 as a British-born Black, and until recently was thought to be the country's first Black mayor. He wasn't, because the state of, we're still learning now about Black heroes and first and so on. It's always a mistake to use the term of first because there's always someone before. We need a lot more research. A Northerner, Archie felt a strong affiliation for Black seamen, as he was not only the son of a Barbadian seafarer, but had spent the early part of his life as a seaman himself. As president of the African Progress Union, Archie led a deputation to meet the Liverpool's deputy mayor on the 16th of June 1919 to plead the case of the local Black community, including unemployed colonial seamen who were left stranded following the First World War. Now, in 1919, there were terrible riots taking place in Britain, and the reason was because Lloyd George has promised Home Fit for Heroes. The war had lasted for 4 years, and poor white people returning home then felt they'd been let down and turned their wrath, in some cases, upon people they thought were aliens, when frequently they were their own, British-born even, Black neighbours returning home themselves after service in the war. Now, there were a series of meetings leading up to the 1945 Congress. First one to be called that was in Paris in 1919. There was one in London in 1921. In fact, there were 2 in London, I should say, and New York City in 1927. Around this time, there were questions of nationality, which also added to the difficulties experienced by Black sailors and their families during this period. Early in the 20th century, when the Atlantic world was beginning to close its borders and implement new passport and documentation restrictions and systems, there were heightened feelings of issues of race and nationality around this time, and a manifestation of which was the requirement of proof of identity from non-white British colonial seamen in Britain. Now, the problem was that some people in Britain, Black seafarers, their countries had been colonized after their birth. So frequently they didn't have British style birth certificates, and they had to prove their nationality. Now, the problem, things don't change because we're still seeing that now with the Windrush generation. It's amazing to think that it goes back that far. Later, in the years following the First World War, British-born black people were also required to carry passes. Seafarers were required to carry passes, a move that reinforced their feeling of segregation from their fellow neighbours. This confusion over the national status of black seamen sometimes led to hardship regarding compensation for death, for instance, that taking place in the First World War, and injury, because these were given to British nationals domiciled in countries in the colonials and protectorates, and some of these were not able to prove their birth. They were very badly hit in view of this. But to counter this, there were British institutions, budding black institutions during this period, available to take part in future congresses. The Liverpudlian John Archie had been chosen to be the first president of the African Progress Union in 1918. And another prominent activist at the time was a London doctor, John Alcyn Daw. The League of Coloured Peoples was later founded in 1933 with the help of visiting African Americans, such as the history professor, Dr. Charles Wesley, and Stella Thomas, the first woman barrister and later the first magistrate in West Africa. This woman, in West Africa, that is. The president of the League of Coloured Peoples was to be Dr. Harold Moody, a Jamaican-born doctor who remained in that office until his death, 2 years after the Pan-African Congress of 1945. In spite of what seemed to be a universally hostile environment, there were white allies, some of whom would manage to achieve positions of being able to help. Soon after the outbreak of the Second World War, Pastor Daniel Zakate, a vicar in Liverpool, who did very good work taking in orphans, for instance, black orphans during that period. He wrote to one such ally, Arthur Creech Jones of the Labour Party, who later to be the Colonial Affairs spokesman, telling him that black seamen on the Elder Dempster cruise in 1940 were not happy with their employers. The Seamen's Union, to insistence on all alien in inverted commas, labour on British ships being paid British rates only applied to crews signed on in British ports or in European articles. Some shipowners got round this by signing on African seamen in West Africa, black firemen and stokers being paid at a lower rate. West African crews had not the pay increases of Europeans, and McCarthy claimed that even worse, black crewmen engaged in Liverpool were being discharged in West African ports, even though they had families here, and fresh hands were taken on who were, as he put it, largely raw, inverted Africans who knew practically about a seaman's job. Their wages, Reverend McCarthy felt, were derisory, a mere £6 a month compared with £16 paid to a white fireman and £12 to an African fireman, a fireman being an engineering job on a ship, signed on in Liverpool. Ship owners in Liverpool, the nearest largest port to Manchester, had previously employed another policy, which was even worse, in fact. African sailors were recruited in West African ports, their employers telling them that they'd returned home after a round trip was complete. In fact, they reneged on this policy by paying them off in Liverpool in order to build up, in inverted commas, a pool of readily available labour whenever they needed them. This policy had the effect of increasing the numbers of black settlers more than any other, because one of the things it did was some found wives and reared families here. The newer policy of reversing this arrangement, Archie's complaint, meant that the African sailors were now abandoned in African ports, only to be replaced by cheaper, inexperienced labour, precisely Daniel Archie's complaint. Now, the port of Liverpool has had a black population since the 1730s even. The population at the time of the Congress was around 8,000, many having come to Britain to help the war effort, of course, while others belonged to what is now the old, well-established black community. Of the adult black population, 30% were seafarers, 10% had shore jobs, and the rest suffered from an employment collar bar as a deja vu of the First World War. What happened after the First World War? This went on afterwards into civilian life as well. This once welcomed black contribution to the Merchant Navy would soon be resisted by the National Union of Seamen, who made a determined effort to keep black seamen off merchant ships after the war, as a continuation of their policy which had begun at the beginning of the 20th century. Now, there were implications for Manchester at this time, for the Manchester black community, because the sudden and calamitous decline of merchant shipping throughout the 20th century, in fact, hit British seafarers of all races hard. Many grappling with the economic and political and politics of world shipping only with great difficulty. The results of the decline are too difficult to explain at any length here, but they included market demands, government policy, competitiveness with other fleets, and often just a case of luck and chance. Black people had been born in Liverpool, as I said, since at least the 1750s. But between the wars in the 20th century, Liverpool's large black resident community have been treated as outcasts. The decline in shipping may have been the beginning of the end of the old black population prior to the new, what we call the Windrush generation in London, but in fact it was wider than that in Britain. In that, in some ways, it allowed the decline in Liverpool led to the development of the Manchester black community by adding unemployed seafarers of African descent who migrated to the city in order to seek work in the form of land-based jobs. Most of the seafaring jobs were still available in Wales and the Northwest. The tramp trade, tramp seafarers trade as you call it, tramp ships being concentrated in those areas. The smaller numbers being registered in Liverpool can be explained by the fact that it was a little port with relatively few West African West Africans were concentrated, since fewer black seamen were employed on passenger carrying vessels. There were not so many black people employed on passenger facing vessels, because they didn't want black people to be seen on ships at the time. Now, some moved inland to see job opportunities in towns such as Manchester. Others went to Cardiff to seek higher rates of pay, just like the sailors Honey Eo and Solomon Bassey, and Thomas Bassey, the father of Solomon Bassey. After the war, many discharged African sailors from Liverpool made their way to ports such as Cardiff. Solomon Bassey, the son of Thomas, who had arrived in Britain from Calabar in the 20th century, remembered, "My dad was in Cardiff for a bit. He used to walk down there, walked on foot with another countryman looking for ships, because that was another shipping port," to use his words. The only ships they got were palm boats or Elder Dempster. It was cheap labour for them. It was like the Clan Line. They had all Asian labour, just cheap. What they did by force of necessity was to stay overnight on the way in safe houses, which would really just houses that would take in black travellers. It allowed them to walk to Manchester and walk to Cardiff in that way. They just set off in the morning from this place along the way. It might be, I don't know, even Willows or somewhere, you know, halfway to Manchester or so and so. As in the case of Bassey and Honey Ale. Many of the older communities, such in Manchester, black communities, such as Merseyside, the Merseyside area, and in Hume as well, owe their origin to settlers from Liverpool, since added to by the latest Windrush period. In the north, the Windrush people after the war came from the Reina del Pacifico, was one ship, and the Orbiter at around the same time as the Windrush. A little bit later. As in the early days of Liverpool, in Manchester, individual black people had lived in various parts of the growing metropolis. Some as individual black servants. I'm talking about very early now, in the 1700s, nearly 1800s. If not technically slaves, they'd be black servants in whatever districts their masters chose to live. But during the later Victorian and following an Edwardian period, the city of Manchester seems to have attracted an emerging black intelligentsia, drawn not only from other parts of Britain, but the whole of the African diaspora in general. African students were by no means new to the city, to the big cities, or to Manchester. The children of African rulers had been sent from the early days to Britain, both as groups and individuals. The idea was, they were encouraged by the government. The idea was, if they were brought for a British-style education to Britain, when they went back to be rulers in their own countries, they'll have a favourable view of Britain, and likely not to want to trade with other European powers, you know, German states and France and so on. So Britain gained politically by doing that. During the later Victorian and following Edwardian period, black people were joined, however, by a new breed of educated black individuals. Well, perhaps they didn't have the same sort of political black framework as the sons of African rulers. Times had changed with the growth of European colonialism, the rise of scientific racism, assisted by newer forms of racism, such as the growing eugenics movement, which made life extremely difficult for Black people of all stations, regardless of rank back home. The response of people of African descent in Manchester would be to push for the 1945 Congress to be held in the city, which had already received an influx of seamen from other parts, such as Liverpool. When they succeeded, the Fifth African Congress was largely to be organised by people of African origin living in Manchester. A new ideology of colonial liberation was being formulated in the 1930s, designed to challenge existing political systems. The support for this was derived from two powerful elements: a resident Black proletariat, that is, poor and ordinary folk, and an educated class, an intelligentsia drawn from almost every corner of the African diaspora all over the Black world. The people of Manchester were politically conscious, a reason why it would have been selected as the venue for the Fifth Pan-African Congress. Now, when the war started in the spring of 1942, Black allies began arriving from a source outside the British Empire. African American servicemen came to Britain, bringing with them the racial segregation experienced back home. At that time, the American army was deeply segregated along lines of race. Now, the British government was in something of a quandary, as it didn't want to offend the American allies, but was aware that many British people didn't really accept that level of racism of the transatlantic cousins. The government never really found a way of dealing with it. I'll just show you an image. Of Dr. Harold Moody. Dr. Harold Moody of the League of Coloured Peoples, remember, was very concerned with the treatment of African American troops. When fighting broken out in a Liverpool dance hall, for instance, caused by a white American physically violently separating a Jamaican technician from his willing dancing partner and pulling a dagger on him, the response of the dance hall was to bar Black patrons. Moody's counter-response was that such technicians were volunteers who'd made great sacrifices to come to Britain and to help with the war effort. So he decided what he was going to do. He determined to hold the League of Coloured People's 12th annual general meeting in Liverpool, his own society's meeting in Liverpool in March 1943, as a gesture of solidarity with African Americans and West Indian resident technicians. Another factor that had led to the shift of Black activism towards the Northwest was the influence of a British Guyanese, Rastafari Mackinnon. Now, he was born George Thomas Nathaniel Griffith. He'd taken the name out of respect for the courageous stand of the Emperor of Ethiopia against fascist Italian oppression during the war. A little bit like the manner of African Americans taking Muslim names, for instance, in the 60s and 70s, and religion, in order to connect with their African roots. Mackinnon moved to Manchester in 1939, sharing a flat with another activist, prominent activist, George Padmore. Now, Mackinnon became a student at Manchester University, reading history. Awful lot of medical doctors and the historians were in this particular group of people. He also had other organizational and financial skills that he put to good use, though. One issue Mackinnon addressed would go some way to answering the concerns of Dr. Harold Moody of the League of Coloured Peoples about the poor treatment of black servicemen on public amenities. Mackinnon's first business venture was what he called the Ethiopian Tea Shop, which led to a chain of restaurants offering a welcome to African American troops stationed at the nearby US service station at Burton Wood. The proceeds were used to finance not only a publishing house, a bookshop, and a monthly journal, but also contributed to the funding of the Pan-African Congress held in Manchester in 1945. This also had the byproduct of reinforcing the choice of that city as the site of one of the most iconic events in the history of black people worldwide. Now, say something about racial discrimination during the Second World War. Black people in Britain also found it difficult to endure this prejudice alongside their African American cousins, feeling themselves to be British with a long history of service to the mother country. Like the African American servicemen, British-born black Africans seeking a night out in the town faced difficulty. One of these places was the Ocean Club, which was a large and thriving seaman club, international seamen's club in wartime Liverpool. But black seamen were not encouraged to visit because of the overt racism shown towards them. Instead, they were quietly diverted to another African club known as Jokers on the pretext that they would feel more comfortable than in the white environment of the Ocean Club. Now, the League of Coloured Peoples three-day conference in London in 1944 had the intention of drawing up a charter for coloured people. Now, this was to be something of a portent for the resolutions of the following year at the 5th Pan-African Congress. It would be very difficult to list the iconic figures that made up the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester. 90 delegates and 11 fraternal delegates and observers, such as the Federation of Indian Organizations, attended. A plaque commemorating this important event is sited on the recently built Art Faculty Building, facing All Saints Square in what had previously been Chorlton Town Hall, shown here, where the 6-day event took place. Represented were West, East, and South African, British West Indians, although not on this occasion, French colonial representatives, because the war had just ended and that was just all being sorted out in France. There were also British-based organisations and individuals, such as the veteran, militant, and the individuals from other countries like the USA, such as the veteran, militant African-American leader, W.E.B. Du Bois, now an old man. It was the singularity and uniqueness of particular individuals like Du Bois that made the conference and such a momentous occasion. These names are memorable and read like an encyclopedia of recent prominent world leaders. Amy, the wife of the then late Jamaican activist Marcus Garvey, who's also been a member, added her voice to the assembly to plead the case for black women ahead of her time. The case is still being made. Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Dr. Hastings Banda of then British Nyasaland, and the South African writer Peter Abrams were also present. Since the Italian occupation of Ethiopia in 1936, the International American Friends of Abyssinia, that was the old name for Ethiopia, Abyssinia, had changed its name to the International African Service Bureau, which included Kwame Nkrumah, Ras Mackinnon, and George Padmore. George Padmore, Mackinnon's flatmate, was particularly pleased that, unlike earlier congresses organized W.E.B. Du Bois in the 1920s, the Fifth African Congress in Manchester differed, and it was not simply a meeting of small groups of intellectuals, but possessed what he called a plebeian character, welcoming the interest of the local black community. He meant ordinary people, in fact, many of whom travelled from other parts of the Northwest, such as representatives of the Negro Welfare Association and Negro Welfare Centre and the Coloured Workers Association. Unlike earlier Pan-African meetings, which had something of a bourgeois character, which simply reflected the academic nature of the participants. Once again, they were aided in that charter for coloured people by Arthur Creech Jones, who was soon to be the Labour government's colonial secretary. Creech Jones helped in the drafting of this charter, which had begun previous years, which demanded full self-government for colonial peoples in the earliest possible opportunity, and insisted that, to use their words, the same economic, educational, legal and political rights shall be employed by all persons, male and female, whatever their colour. All discrimination in employment, in places of public entertainment and refreshment, or in other public places, shall be illegal and shall be punished. These words are surprisingly similar to what would come to pass decades later, maybe, after waiting a lot of time, in 1970s, during the acts, anti-racist acts. At the beginning, I said that the Fifth African Congress in Manchester was arguably the most important event of both the 20th and 21st centuries to people of African descent. This, to me, is by no means an overstatement. Now, of the delegates attending, to name a few, at this iconic event, Jomo Kenyatta became the first president of an independent Kenya within little more than a decade and a half. The first would be the Gold Coast changed its name to Ghana, and the representative Kwame Nkrumah became their president. Obafemi Awolowo, Jaja Wachukwu became ministers in the independent Nigeria, and Dr. Hastings Banda would become the first president of the independent British Nyasaland, renamed Malawi. Now, I remember a Liverpool-born black elder, Mrs. Mary Cadbury, telling me with great pride, the great pride she felt, when she heard that a local doctor, Dr. Banda, had been made president of his home country. Dr. Banda had his surgery near the lower part of Upper Parliament Street in the heart of Britain's black settlement area, and was highly regarded in that role. It was seen that, though, he had a greater mission to fulfill, so basically in Liverpool, a good doctor was lost. Manchester was a momentous occasion in many ways, because it not only covered, it was not covered at all very much by the media, but for one, activists and progressives had come from all over the world to plead the cause against colonialism and discrimination. Two, they had met and interacted with those black, that's the progressives, the intellectuals, had met and interacted with those black people domiciled in the UK and British-born black people. And three, they devised a joint action that would lead to the end of colonial rule, not only in British territories, but those in other parts of Europe. After this event, within decades, the colonies toppled like dominoes. The first one gaining its independence in 1957. This was followed by other European countries. The oath taken at the 5th Pan-African Congress in 1945 in Manchester served as a landmark in history and the pacemaker of decolonization, as one commentator put it. But just a few days in October, it could be said that Manchester had become the epicenter of the black diaspora of the Pan-African world, an event still largely unknown to many. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a wide-ranging and illustrative talk. What can I say? You're already getting a lot of praise from the Q&A session. Just to remind people again, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you do have questions, do log them in there. And we have Marie, who's kindly agreed to go through the questions and feed them to me. But just to start things, it's a question from Marie herself. What's being asked is that, what do you think the local press felt? I mean, why was it that this Congress wasn't so covered in the local press? Even in the Northwest, talk less of the national press. That's back in 1945, Ray.
Well, that's a good question. To be honest, it's simply because they were not interested. As far as they were concerned, it was sort of a group of, in inverted commas, natives, misunderstanding what the word natives meant, getting together and having some sort of jamboree in the middle of Manchester, in Chorlton Cumberley Town Hall. But when you come to think of it, there are serious sides of this. But the process of decolonisation at the time, would it be, if that hadn't have happened, would it happened significantly later, I believe. Certainly delayed, but the principle had always been, since the colonial period, which was very much in process at the time, divide and rule. That was the way that colonies were kept down, by playing one so-called tribe, frequently nations, against each other. And it happened all over the world. In India, it would be Muslim against Hindu. People don't realize the origins of the Muslim versus everybody else difficulties we're faced in now, extremist that is, because it started then in colonial times. It was deliberate policy. But here we have in Manchester people from coming in all over the place. I mean, you get African nobility and well-placed, well-off African families coming and sharing their viewpoint with people of poor origin from African Americans, for instance, or the West Indies, who had been slaves, until comparatively recently. I mean, when the congresses first started, if you can count 1900 as one of them, the conference, the first conference, the African American slaves would be only born in slavery, would be only 36 years of age. The last ones died, I know, in the 1940s. Certainly 1939, there was one still alive who hadn't died yet. So therefore, I mean, this was staggering. You're getting the descendants of slaves mixing with all sorts of people from all over the black diaspora. That to me is staggering. We didn't have that. Sorry for going on, but I'm thinking of the Black Lives Matter thing and the demonstrations pulling down statues and so on. And I'm thinking, this is positively flimsy compared with what happened in 1945, because people really did get together. I know that it's wonderful that people did react to the death of poor George Floyd, but it seemed to have, I don't know, it's not my imagination. It didn't exactly fizzle, it hasn't fizzled out. But what power they had in 1945. They actually became free countries, all of those. The names are incredible. I remember that one fellow telling me that in fact the Carty's house entertained all of those people, Nkrumah, Banda, Kenyatta, all these from the West Indians, contributors, all these people, including people like De Valera and people like that earlier on, before the Congress. You can't believe this. All these people who claim to have been colonized, and that would be the Irish as well, you know, involved in the process. You have these affiliate groups, you see, like Indian, for instance, and other groups who had the same claim when they got to colony.
Well,
sorry for going on.
Right. Well, I'll give you time to catch your breath. There's somebody on the line called Vanessa Kirkpatrick who says, thank you very much that you apparently helped to supervise her thesis, which was called I Didn't Know Black Men Could Fly. And she's very appreciative of your talk. There are lots and lots of appreciations coming through. But just to bring you back to a few more questions, we've got somebody asking if you might talk about Dr. Peter Milliard, because I think he was the president of the Pan-African Federation at the same time as Ras Makanen. was involved in the the Congress. So he jointly ran it with Raz Mackinnon. I don't know if you want to say anything.
To be honest, as I said, it's an encyclopedia. That's well known. It's impossible to have included some of these. For instance, what did I say about, I mean, you know, Du Bois, as the Americans call him. I call him Dubois. Obviously, even on my French education, I always call him Dubois. I mean, he was very important. But I think he got 2 name checks in that talk. Not only him, but what about Williams, who kicked off the whole process, really, right at the beginning. In 1897, his first organisation. I mean, good heavens. And these people have stuck together right through the process, right to independence. Isn't that a fantastic pat on the back for people who fought for black freedoms?
Absolutely.
There should be statues everywhere, certainly in their countries, not only their countries, but other people's countries as well. And I'm sure the Pan-Africanists would have no problem with having Mackinnon and Nkrumah and Du Bois, simply because Du Bois died in Ghana. Absolutely. And Mackinnon died in Kenya.
Kenya, that's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, good heavens, you know.
Well, okay. Well, let's keep the discussion going. Somebody's asking again a bit more about, maybe you're expanding why Manchester, because, you know, there's clearly an intelligentsia in London, for example, and obviously, as you've described, Liverpool, I mean, even if it wasn't as intelligent, so to speak, as London, it had a historical black population. So what do you think it was about Manchester particularly? Or was it just that there are lots of characters?
I honestly think it's different in character, because don't forget, Liverpool is the oldest black community in Europe, bar none. And by 1730, at least, with names and pectoral and people born and so on in the 1700s, the families had died out into the white population in some case. I'm not kidding. I know them. It's tremendously old. But the thing is that in a way, Manchester was just sort of, in a way, acquiring its black population because of people moving from Liverpool because of the decline of shipping. The poor, if you like, poor seafarers and so on, if you think of seafarers being poor, as well as the time of just almost by accident, you're getting black students. So the university has also played its part. I mean, Mackinnon was in the history department. How good is that?
Absolutely.
I honestly think, this is just a humorous thought I had, is why doesn't the restaurant, or I don't know what they have, cafeteria in the history department, have a plaque for Mackinnon? Because he was one of the guys who fought for integrated eating.
Absolutely.
Because people could not eat. And that would be a slightly humorous tip, but it's not so humorous. It would be remembering a great student.
Well, we have our students. Our students are doing a map of Black Manchester. So his name is coming up, and his because he traded from, I think it's number 54 Oxford Road. So wherever that is.
Another to that. Can I also add another for that? And that is an ordinary guy. Okay, that's an eminent. But let's add Len Johnson, the boxer, because Len Boxer, the boxer, was British-born black, poor. Okay, he was a celebrity in being a boxer, but he was a local man who was a representative of the local, poorer and less educated Black Mancunians.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Liverpool, you can go on forever. Knocking statues down, needs to be a few built.
Absolutely. I think there is a lecture on Len Johnson later on in the
wonderful,
Black History Month. Now, there's a question from Raphael Horman. Can you say something about the women who were involved in the Pan-African Congress? Well, you've already mentioned Amy Garvey, I think.
Yeah.
So
there were several people who brought their wives along. I think the second wife of, no, the first wife of Jomo Kenyatta was there.
Okay.
And he married twice. And the photograph I showed was of
I think it was Amy Garvey, was it? I'm not sure.
No, it wasn't Amy Garvey. No, it wasn't. It was Jomo Kenyatta's second wife with Mackinnon. It was actually photographed. It's just a snapshot. This is the thing about I mentioned earlier about them not being wonderful pictures. Apart from, say, you know, I mean, Samuel Coleridge Taylor and John Archie was Lord Mayor. They might have had decent photographs taken of them. But most of the pictures, like Williams and like Mackinnon, were just what we'd call snapshots, just by ordinary people. I mean, he's just standing in the sun as though he's on holiday in Kenya, with you know, Jomo Kenyatta's wife, second wife. But there's a problem there. Is that I think that there were still issues of as Amy Garvey was quick to mention, she was speaking for all those wives so they came along and were not mentioned, but were probably, and in fact we know, in fact, were the driving force behind their husbands in their attendance at that particular meeting.
Oh, that's good. Are there more questions? I'm going to throw one to you from a list that I've got. Don't know. Do you think that decolonization was really speeded up a lot with that Congress? Do you think it would have happened any faster without the Congress?
I don't think it would have, no. I think the fact that although the press didn't cover it, I'm sure the political feelers were out there and realized this was important. These people, for instance, I mean, after that, they were after Kenyatta. They were after, it's like going to university. Who was it? I forgot who it was now. Somebody said that being in prison, was it Mandela? I don't know who it was, who said being in prison is sort of university for future African rulers. Being locked up, because you had your spell of prison and then you came out and you became president of your country, if you were lucky and survived it, because some didn't. We think of some people, it might have been eminent, like Steve Biko, who were killed in the process. Yeah. And others. Lumumba, I'm thinking of Lumumba, for instance.
Yeah, because I guess that's the thing as well. I mean, I've done a bit of reading as well, and it did seem to be mainly the British countries, as you say. The French weren't really there. And obviously Lumumba was from the Belgian Congo, so he wasn't there either.
No.
Do you think that was the case anyway, that because I guess Britain was the mother country, I guess there would have been more of, I guess, the African population from what was the British Empire?
Yeah, that's true. But the interesting thing is that when the dominoes came down, and they almost won out, you know, Kenya, and then somewhere else, then it's the West Indies, you know, different islands, the West Indies, and so on, and it all came tumbling down, starting actually with India.
That's true. 1948.
And then you get Ghana, you know, or the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
But when you come to think of it, there were the European political pundits were also watching the process. As well, I was saying that political eyes were on that Congress. But you also see the European political pundits must have been doing the same.
Yeah.
Because they came down as quickly as the British, almost at the same time. I mean, Portugal lost its colonies. The French were deeply disturbed by, you know, losing theirs and so on, and other places too.
Right, yeah.
Interesting. It's how how it all happened almost at the same time. You know,
Yeah.
not at the same time, but, you know, within a very short time span. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it did seem like an avalanche in its own.
Yeah.
Mm.
But it all started in Manchester. I can have my own opinions, can't I? As a northerner, I can claim that, can't I? I've got the right to an opinion.
True. And I guess if we sort of expanded it, Manchester at the time, I was saying in Nigeria, because I'm dual, whatever, they sometimes talk about cloth being Manchester. So Manchester was a really big trading city.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know, post the kind of, I guess the dire period of the slave trade and so on, in a way, Manchester did become an economic power in terms of its trading links with West Africa and things like textiles and so on as well.
Yeah.
I wonder whether that
Manchester's pretty important, I think.
Mm. Mm.
In fact, in a way, Manchester, when the old community, of which I am a member, of the very old black community, and I keep on telling people this, being not arrived yesterday, but generations back, right into the Crimean War. Manchester were the inheritors of the old black community because of the decline of shipping in a way. Or at least the poorer parts were, as I mentioned earlier, when people did literally got up and walked to Manchester, you know, poor seamen and so on. But, and sometimes not so, well, poor, but nobility. For instance, I mentioned Honey Eo. Now, Honey Eo was one of the Effi kings of Nigeria.
That's right.
So therefore, this is what colonization had done to Africa. 200 years earlier, when the black students were being brought over for the process of indoctrination by the British government and then sent back as kings, they'd have been greatly lauded. They were introduced. I mean, you can think of individuals being taken, Philip Quake, you think of William Answer being taken from the Gold Coast, being taken to meet the king and so on, King George and so on. Yeah. But I mean, 200 years later, you find that those African nobles, if you like, or people who back home would be considered middle class or noble, were actually on the breadline in Liverpool.
That's true.
So therefore, I mean, I know a friend of mine, Zachary Kingdon in Maritime and the World Museum, the African Gallery.
Yeah.
He invited, when he did a program, he invited people from the local black community whose family had given artifacts to the museum.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Only last year.
Yeah, because actually even the name Bassi and so on that you mentioned, apart from Shirley Bassi is a very big family again in Calabar in Nigeria.
Yeah. That's right, Calabar, African country, Ibibio, all that southwest, southeast.
Yeah.
Fascinating. People really should study Africa, and in fact, black people, because it's a fascinating area. And I know several friends, and I think today in the audience is a Bill Hearn. And, you know, he's really keen on black history, the white guy. He's really keen on it. He was talking about Len Johnson only the other day to me.
Right, there is a question. Let me see. Well, there's quite a lot in the chat bar. If you want to look at the chat bar, those of you who are still on the call. But I mean, Ray, you're kind of being showered with praise, which is fantastic. So I think
surprised at that. Make a change. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good audience. I wish I'd have been there in the round. I'd have been asking for a few pints. In the brilliant way, you know.
we want to make this a regular occasion. I think we'd all like to walk the streets. But yeah, there's a lot of interest in a blue plaque for Ras Makanen. There's some discussion about the fact that the end of the Second World War must have obviously catalyzed the Pan-African Congress. You're absolutely right, because at the end of the Second World War as well, there was the beginnings of the foundings of the United Nations. So it was then the League of Nations. And one of the things about the Pan-African Congress, which is why they had the declaration, is that they actually sent a letter to the then forming United Nations saying that everybody has the right to self-determination and so on. So it's absolutely critical. So yes, the ending of the war and that kind of, if you like, nation in world in unity moment that happened after the Second World War was really one of the things that the Pan-African Congress was able to ride on in its demand for independence of African countries. So yeah.
Wonderful.
Right, well, I think there is a choice, audience. We can actually probably end in about 5 to 10 minutes. And if you stay online, our tech masters are willing to help us stream the opening ceremony for the entire PAC at 75 event, which is happening this evening. Obviously, again, as you know, we can't be there live, but we have actually been doing some, what would I call it, technical gymnastics. So you can stay on and watch the event online here. Otherwise, there is a YouTube link, but we think because you've been such a fantastic audience, it might be just as well for us to be able to stream it to you from this end as well. But I'm going to see whether there are any more questions before we probably go, or rather before I hand it back to Rachel and the tech crew, who will then stream the opening ceremony for us live. But last few questions before we close this session, if there are any. Jenny, what was your question? Can you get it streamed through, or can you actually, Marie, do you have it there somewhere? There's a Jenny Martin who's asking why we haven't asked her question. Not sure. Okay. Is this the relevance of the message in light of the BLM protests? It might be. Well, I'm going to ask that anyway. Yes. Well, I think. Well, I guess it's a combined. So the question is really: are there parallels from, I guess, the 1945 PAC panel, particularly on the colour problem in the United Kingdom, and the hostile environment that we have now with the Home Office? And I guess also the issue about Black Lives Matter. Can we draw any parallels between, you know, the problems then and the problems now?
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? Well, the thing is, what really disappoints me is the lack of mobilization. Because really, it's people just striking out in a knee-jerk way. And it's quite justifiable of the terrible events that have given rise to it, to sort of make a knee-jerk response, emotional response. But the interesting thing about all those Pan-Africanists that came right through from the end of the 19th century is they dealt with things in a very measured way. They advanced very slowly and deadly. They were deadly without any violence at all. For instance, there's one person I can think of, and that is Harold Moody was thought to be over-compliant by many people. What Americans call an Uncle Tom character. Not everybody, but some people accused him of that. But he was a guy who just didn't lose his temper. So what he did was, well, he did it inwardly, no doubt. But for instance, it was quite common in the late 1920s for the BBC to use the N-word quite normally. Oh, talking about the Queen going visiting somewhere, or some royalty, you know, king. Oh, on, look at all the little ends following him, sweet little children. And it was quite normal. But he complained about it in such a way, in a very gentlemanly way, and actually had a letter back from the BBC saying, we will never use this again in publication, in our broadcast.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, so he got what he wanted. The aim is to get what you want in whatever way you can. That's the way of dealing with things, it would seem.
Thank you. That's a really good way to end this really amazing conversation. I mean, I think it's a shame that we can't all be there to give you the round of applause and indeed take you to the pub. But I think we'll have to delay that, because I mean, I think what a wonderful way to start the events today, and to have your knowledge and inspiration. I think we are truly grateful to you, and it's been an amazing talk. And there are people saying that they're already giving you a round of applause anyway. So you're getting virtual applause. So I think in your different Zoom screens, please join with me in thanking Ray for this really, really illuminating and illustrating talk. So thank you, Ray. And we hope to see you in reality pretty soon.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you very much. Just again, because these are all free events, so Manchester Metropolitan University has done an amazing job. We're going to have most of these things posted on YouTube. I think this will be posted on YouTube tomorrow. And for the entire duration of the celebrations, which is from here till Sunday, you can view this talk at any time you would like. And all the information from the celebrations will be archived and available for public view. Now, at this point, I'm going to say again a big thank you to Ray, and I hope he can sit back as well. And I'm going to hand over to the tech crew, that's Rachel and team, who are going to, I believe, start to stream the opening event. So thank you, everybody. And again, shout out, there's a lot happening with the opening event. And then we start again tomorrow morning with Afua Hirsch in conversation with our very own PhD student, Khadija Diskin. So thank you, everybody, for attending this evening, and welcome to the opening ceremony.